Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the North Yorkshire Police, Fire and Crime Commissioners Public Accountability Meeting for Tuesday, the 27th of July 2021. We have a number of items on the agenda, and the first is attendance and apologies. I understand we have most people present. Apologies from Simon Dennis, the Chief Executive, and I think we have one other apology, if I'm not mistaken. Colleagues?
Mark Pannoni.
Mark Pannoni, Assistant Chief Constable. We've got some actions from the previous meeting. Update on Operation Chrome. I've actually been a very minor cog in Operation Chrome, actually went out with the team. For those who don't know, Operation Chrome is aimed at, I'm going to say boy racers, but in fact it's a cross-section of people. It seems to be middle-aged racers going around the Harrogate town centre with vehicles that are noisy and in some cases backfiring and revving. I wondered if the Assistant Chief Constable, Lindsay Butterfield, could give us an update on that.
Thank you, Commissioner, of course. So firstly, huge thank you to the public that have raised this as an issue and also shared the information with us that's enabled us to act. Operation Chrome, as you've already said, is in place. It's Harrogate's neighbourhood policing team, along with colleagues from the Roads Policing Group under Specialist Operations, and they are working to tackle the ongoing issues around antisocial behaviour and vehicle use. So we've had some excellent results from this operation, particularly around, we focused on vehicle modification and defect offences, so the typical noisy exhaust issues that we know have been reported through this forum previously. But in targeting some of those vehicles, we've also found that we've dealt with 10 vehicles for no insurance, or drivers that haven't had the right category of licence. We've dealt with 11 manner of driving offences. We've issued 3 Section 59 warnings, which are initial warnings for antisocial vehicle use, and if individuals are subject to a second warning, those vehicles can then be seized. We've dealt with 4 people for mobile phone offences. In total, we've now seized 8 vehicles, and there have been 7 arrests made for individuals who've been driving over the prescribed limit. So that's with excess alcohol in their system. So that started on the 14th of June this year. So I'm sure you'll appreciate some significant results in quite a short space of time. And this is absolutely an ongoing operation. So this is just the start, and pleased to report back at future meetings with continued progress if that would be helpful.
It would indeed. On behalf of the public, I'd like to say thank you very much to North Yorkshire Police. I think this is an excellent piece of work. It's reacting to what the public want. It's addressing public concerns. I'm glad you're going to continue the programme. I think the only observation I'd say is that we've also picked up some complaints from elsewhere, from Starbeck and for Knaresborough, and for those to be included in that piece of work. And I think we have got some questions from the public around that later on in the agenda. Does any colleagues want to add anything to that before we move forward? No, good. Okay, we've also got 101 call response. This was a follow-up from the last public accountability meeting where there's been some concerns expressed about 101, and we've asked for this to appear at the monthly meeting. If you could give us an update, Lindsay, where we are with that and sort of and where the forthcoming actions.
Absolutely, Commissioner. So I'll start with some figures if I can, and then hopefully add some national context before moving to what we intend to do locally to address the ongoing issues. So we have continued to see excessive demand in terms of calls for service into the control room. It's unprecedented, and it is on a national level, although it's having a significant impact on North Yorkshire. And to set some volumes around that, to give people an indication of what we're dealing with, our daily rate for 999 calls is averaging out between the 1st and the 20th of this month at 347 calls for service. So that is an increase of 53 calls per day in the last 6 days. Just to give people some context around that, on Saturday the 24th of July, we were presented with 470 999 calls in a 24-hour period, and that is the highest on record that we've ever received as a service. We are seeing the potential for 9,000 calls to be received by the end of July if our daily volumes continue at this rate. And as I've said already, that is in line with national volumes, So nationally, we are being told that the continuing call pressure will mean it is the highest month of highest demand in July this year. So that continues. We are also seeing a significant increase in our number of 101 call volumes. So the daily rate of total non-emergency calls during the last 6 days is 95 calls per day, higher than between the 1st and 14th of July. So those call volumes continue to put pressure on our control room staff. We are then looking at our answer times, and this is addressed later on in the performance pack, Commissioner, so I can give you more detail then as well. But in terms of 999, our answer time, average answer time between the 1st and 20th this month is 33 seconds. And 101 stands at 7 minutes 15 seconds. And we know that's absolutely not where we want to be as a service in terms of how quickly we answer those calls from the public. So there is an awful lot of work ongoing to address the immediate performance around call handling. This morning we've had some funding approved to put an overtime plan in place, and that will help us at key times to answer those calls more quickly. So by key times we're looking at 2 p.m. until 2 a.m. Sunday to Thursday, and 3 p.m. until 3 a.m. on a Friday and Saturday. So that overtime is being offered out to existing control room staff to deal with the immediate concerns around call volumes. We are also in the process of evaluating a Thrive audit. So Thrive is the threat, harm and risk assessment that's undertaken each call for service that comes into the control room. And we are hoping that within that we will be able to find some efficiencies that can help us to reduce our write-up time for calls, which means that our call handlers are then free more quickly to answer further calls. Now, clearly, it's really important that we balance that against the level of service that we provide. But again, the findings from that audit will be monitored and implemented as quickly as possible. We currently have a course of call handlers and dispatchers, and they are looking to be out of their training in August, which will support us around our resourcing. And we are continuing to manage very closely the COVID restrictions for the control room. So that's not dissimilar to the rest of the organisation. However, there are some special dispensations around the track and trace app for control room staff, and making sure that that is not being brought into the building, because we already have the measures in place in terms of social distancing, mask wearing, etc. So it's keeping our staff as safe as possible and trying to minimise any impact from COVID. We are also looking at the Learning and Development Hub. So this is essentially the tutor unit for control room staff, to see if there is learning from there and if we can maximise any further capacity through those units, which again would help us in the short term. And then longer term, there are a number of projects and reviews that are ongoing in relation to the force control room. And they will report through myself. And again, more than happy to bring that back into this forum at an appropriate time, but it's probably a little bit early to do that today.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, we've had a lot of interest from people, particularly about the 101 call system. I'm just not getting through, and I know there's peaks and troughs. I was in on Saturday evening, I should say, between 7:20 and 9:45 to see what was actually happening. In fairness, in all honesty, there was no call waiting at all. All 999 calls were answered literally within a maximum of 20 seconds. 101s were answered straight away. It was somewhat eerie in some respects. I actually took a picture of the board. But as we know from your own reporting and from what the public tell us, you do have some real outers in terms of time. And I think the additional funding we've approved this morning as emergency funding to give you extra resource will help in the short term. But I think the longer term piece of work that you need to do is the longer term strategy in terms of demand. I know that you have got a meeting about that. You're very focused about that. Is there anything, just because obviously the public are interested in this, is there anything that you can say just in terms of the flavour of that, just to give people a bit of an insight in terms of how seriously you're taking it?
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner. So there is a weekly, it's called a gold group, but essentially an accountability group which sits around this issue. So that's to make sure we are scrutinising our performance on a weekly basis. Clearly that happens on a daily basis within the control room, but at chief officer level that's now on a weekly basis. And to touch on some of the projects that are ongoing, that they look at how we can give members of the public more choice in terms of how they would contact the control room. So we know that the telephone option doesn't work for everybody, and we are working and implementing single online home, which gives individuals an option to report online. But we are also looking at other channels, whether that's a live chat facility, whether that is a digital desk whereby people can contact us by other means. So all of that work is ongoing, and the solutions for that won't be immediate, but just to offer you some reassurance that that work is in hand and progressing in line with that longer term vision for the force control room that I know you're really keen to see as soon as we're in a position to present. Okay, fine. And we've also agreed, or in principle at exec board, there's some additional monies if you need it as well. We've further agreed that, or I've suggested to you actually just step up the recruitment on the basis that being a call handler is not for everyone, and you may well have some people who are training who fall by the wayside. So just step up the recruitment there. I think I would just say to the public who may well be listening to this, Lindsay and I are now meeting on a Friday morning, each Friday morning, to discuss it. If I'm not available, another colleague will be. We're going to be working very, very closely with North Yorkshire Police to make sure we get this right. For me, it's a crucial issue, and I know for members of the public, this may well be their only contact with the police when they dial 101, and we want to get that right. Good. OK, I think we'll now move on to questions from the public. We've had 3 questions from the public, and I think one of my colleagues is going to put them up. So question 1, which people should be able to see on the screen, from Gwen Swinburne. Please, can you address your use of suspects' ethnicity in communication so as not to discriminate in favour of non-white suspects to the detriment of white suspects? Please address this through an open review of your communications and equalities policies. Who would like to pick that up?
So, Commissioner, I'll be able to answer that question if that's OK.
Of course.
Thank you. So, hello, Gwen, and thank you for your question. And your proposal of a review, we have already reviewed our policies, and our corporate communications already have a policy in place which we've looked at as a result of your question, and we do appeal on a regular basis, as you've pointed out, to identify or locate people, whether they're suspects, wanted individuals, missing people, and we always include as many details as possible that can help identify that individual. So this can be anything ranging from their height to their build, their hair colour, their race, the clothes that they're wearing, any distinguishing tattoos, distinctive gait. So as much information as possible to help us to keep people safe or find people. So our requests for this support from the public are based on information that's provided to us, often from victims or witnesses. And that information is passed to our corporate communications team by the investigating officer who wishes to request the appeal. This is normally after we've got a witness statement or we've got a confirmation of the description of the person that we're looking for. But the content will also depend on the information that the victim or witness can provide to us, because we can't always recall all of those details. So as you'll know from our demographics here in North Yorkshire, the vast majority of our resident population are white, and therefore the vast majority of people that we have contact with or make appeals for will also be white. And there is some information on our FOI pages if you'd like to look at it, in terms of details about arrested suspects and the descriptions of arrested suspects, etc., when an FOI has been made about race and ethnicity previously. CCTV appeals speak for themselves, because we can actually see an image of the person that we're looking for, but we don't discriminate against any individual characteristics, and we include as many of the characteristics that are known as possible. And we are going to publish, obviously, a full answer to you, Gwen, in writing, and on there will be some examples of appeals that we've made where we have included the person's ethnicity in cases where that individual that we seek to find is not white, and we've been clear in that description of the ethnicity of the person that we're looking for. So I hope that provides you with some reassurance that we have reviewed our policy, there is a policy in place, and we publish the information that is available on the description of the person that we're looking for. So hopefully that will help. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. It's also fair to say I've actually had a look at some of the appeals as a result of this question. And it's fairness. it does cover different types of ethnicity, and I know you're going to send some of those across, Chief Constable, to Gwen Swinburne. So thank you for that. The next question is a question from Tim Cook. And it says, on the 2nd of May 2020, the PM announced that there would be an additional 76 million for victims of domestic abuse due to lockdowns. How much did North Yorkshire receive? When was the start of the money being handed out to end organisations, and when did it complete? And then there seems to be a supplementary thing underneath there. It says, in July 2020, the then PFCC commissioned IDAS to produce a report on the family court systems and domestic abuse. Given the changes in the country generally, does that report need to be revised, or a more robust set of actions taken from it? One of my senior leadership colleagues, Jenny Newberry, is going to pick up on this question.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Tim, for the questions. To answer the first part of your question, in relation to the 76 million that was made available, 23 million of that was made available to the Ministry of Justice to distribute to police, fire and crime commissioners and police and crime commissioners to distribute locally. In North Yorkshire, we were allocated £344,824 in the first wave of funding, and that was to take us to the end of October. The funding was then extended to the end of March last financial year, and we received an additional £76,587,000. So in total, last financial year, we received £421,411,000, and we distributed that to 11 organisations locally in North Yorkshire to support their efforts with domestic abuse and sexual violence victims during the pandemic. So that covers the first aspect of your question, Tim. Moving on to the second, to give you some reassurance, obviously the report was published pre-pandemic, but we did develop and establish a working group in relation to domestic abuse and family court on the back of the report being produced, and they have been looking at the impact of the pandemic during the last year, and the work that they've been doing against the actions within the report have taken consideration of that. So just to provide some additional assurance, there have been some improvements made which address some of the actions identified in the reports, which I can just provide a little bit of an update, and will provide a further update in writing. So improvements to the availability of special measures in North Yorkshire and York courts, including separate entrances, waiting rooms and screens. We've had the rollout of domestic abuse training for professionals to highlight post-separation abuse and coercive and controlling behaviour. We've had improved information about family court made available, and a family court website to assist survivors system through Clock, and this service has been expanded through the pandemic, so it's available virtually as well. So we've made some significant progress, but there is more to do. But please feel assured that the changes and the impact over the last year is being taken into consideration in relation to the actions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. And this moves us on to our last question, which is question 3. So James Moynihan. So James would like to know, he says, I would like to report the problems of hearing noisy cars and witnessing cars driving through red lights at the York Place Gracious Street junction in Knaresborough. Living in the centre of Knaresborough, we hear the problems a lot and tend to continue to hear for up to 30 seconds after they've driven off. And I think the Deputy Chief Constable, Phil Kane, is going to pick up on this question.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Moynihan, for your question and for reporting the information. So I think just in line with the update that was provided from Assistant Chief Constable Lindsay Butterfield around Operation Chrome, we'll take the information that you've provided to us, we'll pass that to the local command, and we'll include that in the Operation Chrome. So we'll ensure that I get your contact details from the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, and then we'll ensure the local team make contact with you so that we can put some measures in place to progress this. So thank you for raising the issue. We'll include that within Operation Chrome, and we'll get the local team to make contact with you as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. So that moves us on to items 4 and 5, which I intend to take together, which is North Yorkshire Police, domestic abuse, the effects of COVID-19. So we're going to have a COVID-19 pandemic presentation, and then we've also got CMP, impact of COVID-19 on commissioned domestic abuse support services presentation. So as I understand it, Superintendent Alan Harder is going to start on this, and then Jenny Newbury is going to come in later on, I think.
Commissioner, thank you very much. I do have a presentation that I'll just put onto the screen so that you can see that, and then people will be able to follow that as we go through.
Thank you.
Okay, has that come up okay?
Yeah, that's good. You just need to put it in play mode.
Has that come through? Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Hopefully that was the most difficult bit over with in terms of being able to present it with my IT skills. So, and it is, as you said, Commissioner, in terms of a presentation, in terms of North Yorkshire Police around domestic abuse and the impact that COVID had on our response to it. And equally important is how we are responding in the recovery phase coming out of COVID in relation to where we have been and what we've experienced. During the presentation, what I'd like to touch on is to explain what domestic abuse is, put the national setting, the local context, which is really important, what we have delivered during COVID, some of the initiatives, and importantly, the outcomes in terms of the work that we have been completing over the last 18 months since March 2020. So in terms of what is domestic abuse, the definition of domestic abuse has grown and expanded, which I think is entirely appropriate over recent years to reflect who can be affected, who can commit the offences of domestic abuse related matters, and also importantly, the inclusion of coercive and controlling behaviour within that definition. And it's important to understand that these offences, or the domestic abuse category, is for people who are aged over 16. So if it's two 15-year-olds in a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship, that wouldn't be classed as domestic abuse. And equally, if it's two children in a household arguing, fighting, again, that wouldn't be classed as domestic abuse if they're under the age of 16 in relation to that. But that's just as a reminder for people who may not have seen the definition before of what it is that we're actually talking about in relation to this. The other aspect that I think it's important to point out is in terms of domestic abuse itself, that is not a crime type, such as a burglary or an assault. It's the circumstances in which it occurs as described within there, which I hope helps. In terms of a national setting, there has been some work completed in terms of the national findings and results of COVID and the impact that that's had on domestic abuse. I think it's important to understand that when we were aware that COVID was coming, the scale that COVID was going to have across not just North Yorkshire, worldwide, we looked across the world to see what the impact of COVID had been around domestic abuse. And that's not just within North Yorkshire looking, the national teams were doing that as well, so that we could gear up and we could respond in an appropriate way. And one of the significant concerns that we'd seen in other parts of the world was a threefold increase of domestic abuse. And they were in places as far as China, places across Europe as well. And that was the scale that we were expecting to see taking place across North Yorkshire and the rest of the United Kingdom. And so when we talk about some of the increases that we'll touch on, we just need to take that into context. The other element to it is when we see those sorts of increases is the risk that comes with domestic abuse. When we look at there's no movement, people are in lockdown, people are in houses, with in effect their perpetrator, the person committing that domestic abuse, that can see not only the increase of domestic abuse, but the high end level of domestic abuse in terms of domestic homicides as well, which was also a concern, not only locally, but nationally in relation to that. And that recognition that home isn't always a safe place for some people. And that was a very clear message that we were putting out in relation to that. So anticipation of what was happening around the world, what might happen within the United Kingdom. There were some national goal groups that were created. They had inputs from the National Domestic Abuse Coordinator, had an impact around CPS charging decisions, impacts around courts, media, and the support agencies that provide that third sector support in relation to victims and other agencies as well, all contributing towards the response that was taking place in relation to domestic abuse and COVID. Clearly, people being in lockdown, not having access to work, some of the peer support, some of the friend support, family support that might not be available as it had been previously, and some of the places where people could go to seek refuge. There was concerns that people would be living in fear in relation to that, and we needed to respond appropriately in order to do so, which we were able to do, which I'll explain. One of the responses that we did see at the very beginning was many forces reported that they'd seen a reduction of domestic abuse when the lockdown was first introduced. That wasn't something that we'd anticipated. Equally, my peers in other forces hadn't anticipated that either. And there was the anticipation of what would be coming next after that initial decline in the reported numbers in relation to that. And I'll be touching that within the presentation. But what we did hear nationally was a significant increase in reports from members of the public to some of the national charities and support lines, and some significant increases into the hundreds in terms of percentages that were increasing. That was something that we did respond to. We spoke locally with our partners in terms of IDAS, in terms of how those national reports were transferring to their support services and what impact that was having around our reported offences and occurrences that were being reported, and try to understand why is that an increase taking place. Because, and I'll come to it, when we look at our numbers, the two didn't correlate, but it was the nature of the advice and the information that people were seeking, and I'll come to that shortly. So moving on to the next slide, there's two graphs there, okay, and they are split to represent the demands based around our occurrences and the demands based around our crimes. And the reason why I wanted to put that is to draw the distinction between two different types of incidents that we go to. The force control room will take a report of a domestic incident taking place. Police officers will be tasked to respond to that, and on arrival they will make the assessment whether or not any offences have taken place. So a domestic incident might consist of a verbal argument. There's no criminal offences taking place, so we would record that as an occurrence. However, if there was a criminal offence, such as an assault, hadn't taken place, we would then crime that incident and a criminal investigation would commence as a consequence. So this graph is intended to show the number of occurrences that we attended and the impact of those from the report of COVID, which is the red line on the graph, and the impact that the report of COVID had on our reported crimes that were taking place. And that clearly shows that we had an increase of number of occurrences, but we had a decrease in the number of crimes. That mirrors a lot of the information that we were receiving from the national helplines, because people were getting in contact with them around access to children. If there was lockdown, you couldn't go to the households. Where would the children go if there was a care order in place? And so that practical element and response in relation to that would be responding to, and that hopefully that explains why we've seen an increase in one and a decrease in the other, which is reflective as to where we were nationally. Obviously, when we look at those graphs, there's some really steep spikes that are taking place and also some dips. And one of the later slides will give a breakdown as to why they are taking place in the way that we've seen them. We also need to just look at the axes in relation to the graphs. It's a very small point, but because of the numbers that we talk about, it can make a significant increase. We know nationally, locally, that domestic abuse increases at a weekend, which you'd expect when families and couples are together. And therefore, we will see the spikes Friday, Saturday, and on to Sunday. And that is a pattern that is followed. The two graphs are provided are based on a monthly total. So we have approximately between 35 and 50 domestic incidents on a daily basis. But if we have more weekends in a month than other months, we can see an increase. So that's why we'll tend to understand where we are in terms of a mean and those across a month, which also contributes towards some of those spikes that we've got. It's just a small point, but it's just important to remember when we look at some of those elements to it. So what is the impact against COVID against our normal monthly reporting? Well, the slide that I've put up hopefully now shows the previous years in terms of domestic abuse crimes. And these are criminal offences that we've been investigating in relation to the previous 3 years. And you can see that the graphs follow a predominantly similar projection on each of those 3 years, based around what you would see are those summer holiday periods, June, July and August, when we might see people in the nighttime economy previously, barbecues and alcohol in good weather, potentially. Also the increase around the holiday period at Christmas, which we see nationally. And so when we look at the impact of COVID and the reported crimes, initially it followed the same path, and then it did increase in terms of where we were going to for this year in terms of where we are. Does that make sense in relation to that, or if there are any questions at all?
I think it makes sense. It's interesting how it's sort of ebbed and flowed a little bit. Be interesting if you knew what had been triggers around events, really, I suppose. So I mean, obviously we've had waves of lockdowns and then non-lockdown periods.
Exactly, and hopefully my next slide might explain some of that. What we have done within North Yorkshire Police is that we didn't see that significant increase that we'd anticipated in domestic abuse as we'd projected from the original information from other parts around the world. But I think in terms of our response and the responses that we put in place, it's really important for me to be able to explain that. So across North Yorkshire, and within the City of York, we've got a number of operational groups that drive our collective response towards domestic abuse. So that's through the community safety partnerships, where it's a priority. And the two community safety partnerships take turns in chairing the Domestic Abuse Joint Commissioning Group, where again a multi-agency response comes together. We look at where we are in terms of levels, initiatives that are taking place, what services needed to be delivered in support of victims and also perpetrators. At the start of COVID, what we put into place was a operational group, a silver response group. So they're the key leads from organisations who are meeting on a fortnightly basis to discuss the levels of domestic abuse, where the domestic abuse incidents were taking place and how we're responding to those, to make sure all the key agencies were aligned, we were sharing information and were effectively be able to respond to those. So that was the community safety partnerships, ourselves, the representation from the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner's Office, and also from IDAS, who are our Commission Service for Domestic Abuse. And those fortnightly meetings commenced very, very early on within the March of 2020. They've continued and they're still in place now in terms of our continued response in relation to domestic abuse and the impact of COVID in relation to that as well. We also looked at where we've been previously and the increases of demands, because we've seen year on year an increase of domestic abuse. Other forces have as well, and nationally we have, and there are a number of factors for that which are taken into account around improved public confidence around reporting, training for our staff and officers about the identification of offences, and improved crime recording, which is important, and our investigation, and we've seen those increases. And equally, as populations increase, we'd expect our numbers to increase as a consequence in relation to that. So just going to the next part that you'd raised, Commissioner, in terms of, do we understand any of the peaks and troughs that we see? Hopefully this graph isn't overly busy in terms of where we are, but this sets out the domestic abuse crimes that have been recorded on our systems since the national lockdown took place on the 23rd of March last year. And we've plotted on there
we might have lost you
in terms of when. Am I still there?
I think
Hello?
we've lost. Hi, Alan. I think we lost part of that sentence. You might just want to repeat it again.
Okay, is the presentation still with you?
It is.
Oh, okay. So in terms of the graph that shows the significant peaks and troughs that we've got and how that is aligned to the incidents that have taken place since the original lockdown. We can see within that the impacts around the second lockdown, and again a decline in report. Slides move forward, so we don't have
that. I've lost Alan again. I don't know if anybody else can hear him.
I think he's dropped out completely now. We've lost him completely. Hopefully he'll dial back in.
Are you able to plug the gaps, Jenny? You might want to unmute yourself.
Unmute,
Jenny.
that helps. If it is useful, Commissioner, I could start my presentation. It would be challenging for me to pick up where Alan was in his presentation, but up to you entirely.
Yeah, no, you carry on. You move into
okay.
yours.
Right. I shall move to present my presentation. Is that showing on screen for you?
Yep.
Fantastic. So my presentation is to take everybody through the impact of COVID-19 on commission services for domestic abuse. So if I move us on to my first key slide, which is the graph slide. So this is in relation to our domestic abuse victims community-based service, which is our comprehensive service for victims of crime to support them to cope and recover. So this slide provides you with information in relation to the impact that COVID has had on our referrals. So there are key points on this graph.
Just 1 second, Jenny. I think we ought to just tell Alan that Jenny started her presentation, Alan, so if you don't mind, well, actually, we could just get Alan to finish his, because otherwise, and then because people like the Commissioner can get confused very easily.
Of course, I've stopped sharing.
Right, perfect. Okay.
Commissioner, I do apologise. I don't know what happened there.
Not to worry. Connections are not brilliant. Do you want to finish off, Alan, and then we'll then move to Jenny? I got Jenny to start hers on the basis I thought you might be more longer disposed.
Thank you. So the previous graph that has the presentation come back up on the screen now?
Not yet.
I can share it for you, Alan, 1 second.
How many more slides did you have on from the slide you showed us, Alan?
I have 9 slides.
Oh, right. So you're probably nearly there anyway. I'm going to say I think we got to. We were looking at the timelines, and that's what you were explaining when you vanished.
Okay.
So we just got to. You're quite right. We just got to this slide. Yep. Okay. Okay. So I'll just put it on to project.
Okay, so the last slide did explain the impact of the different lockdowns, the easings, and the reported levels that we're seeing. So I explained at the beginning, I'd explain what is the impact of this locally across the force area, and this slide is just to give that representation in terms of the reported crime levels from January, from just before the lockdown, through to June this year. And as you'd expect, those numbers are in those areas of higher population, which fits in with what we've seen in previous years in relation to it. We always look at where we are in terms of our reported incidents, not only for domestic abuse, but a number of other areas of policing. And domestic abuse is one of those key areas that we continually have a look at, and it features in terms of our force management statements and how we submit that information to the Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary's Fire and Rescue Service, so that they know our projections, what challenges that we will see in the future, and most importantly, how we as a force are going to be able to respond to those challenges. And this graph shows not only the previous increase of reporting of domestic abuse since January 2010, but where we expect that to be coming in the future 10, 15 years moving ahead towards with that and that same graph. But this one just takes us to 2025, so the next 4 years in relation to that. And as it explains, these are for those crimes and not the occurrences that I'd explained earlier on before. But what is important that we can see is that significant increase that since 2015, we have seen that in terms of the numbers that have increased almost twice-fold in relation to where we are. Okay. So they're the levels of domestic abuse and incidents that have been reported to us across the force. But what have we done? And what are the other measures that we've been able to use to understand where it is and the impact in relation to that? Because the reporting and the information that we did see showed some different trends in relation to that. And one of the themes that quite consistently came through was some of the change around the relationship between victim and perpetrator and the age groups, because there seemed to be an increase of more child offending against parents in relation to that, which isn't just something that was in North Yorkshire, that was nationally seen as well. And one of the reasons around that is probably around some of the concerns around children want to leave home addresses, those reported arguments, and as a consequence of that. And it's probably reflective of the fact that we did see a significant reduction in our missing from home reports as well during the COVID lockdowns, as you'd expect. But that obviously manifests in another area of demand as a consequence. In terms of MARAC, we have continued to deliver our MARAC meetings. MARAC is the multi-agency risk assessment conference, which we chair on behalf of all the partner agencies. And that's to deal with those highest risk levels of domestic abuse incidents that are taking place across North Yorkshire and the City of York. And that has partners attending from the voluntary and sectors, and also from those from the statutory sectors as well. So the graph on the left-hand side demonstrates where we have been in previous years in terms of levels of MARAC cases taking place across the districts and the City of York in terms of demand. And then importantly, where we've been since January last year coming through to June, which is during that COVID response stages in relation to that. So in the same way that we'd seen the drop in domestic abuse crimes, we've seen a reduction in the number of MARAC cases, as you'd anticipate. And then as we've seen the easing of the restrictions at different places, we've seen those increases and decreases follow as a consequence in relation to that. But what we have seen is over the last 5 years in terms of domestic MARAC cases is a doubling of those conferences that are taking place. So from originally 710 to last year, it's exactly doubled to 1,420. That's something that we're looking at in terms of the demand, how we respond to that as within a partnership setting. And there is a plan that is now being put into place in operation to be able to respond to that and deal with that demand that's been coming through as a consequence. We've also completed a number of proactive work in terms of protecting vulnerable people and the victims of domestic abuse. And that has been through two routes. For example, the first one is around domestic violence prevention orders. These are orders that the police can apply to courts for in response to incidents of domestic abuse where violence has been used or threatened within the relationship. So that doesn't necessarily mean people that are living together, but where there is that domestic association between victim and respondent. And we don't need the support of a victim in relation to these orders, but it's something that we proactively apply for in relation to that, to protect vulnerable people, victims of domestic abuse, and importantly, to allow them that period of time where they can get support through other agencies, IDAS, and get the support that they need if that's needed for them. The graph shows the pre-COVID levels in terms of demand, what we've applied for, and then in March we see a significant drop-off in relation to that. That is reflective of the reduction that we've had also in crimes and how we responded to those. Throughout COVID, we've continued to have business as usual. We've responded to all the domestic reports that we've received, and we've continued with that. But in terms of the necessity to apply for orders, that did reduce. That was against also some changes, as you'd expect, within court settings. A lot of public places closed. Courts were no exception to those, and a response was put into place so that court orders could be made remotely, so we didn't have to attend. That was positive. It allowed us to attend, apply for those orders, and you can see as we went through 2020, as the domestic abuse levels increased, so did our number of orders that we were proactively applying for through the courts were being granted in relation to that. And actually, by having that remote access to the courts to deliver that, that actually had an additional benefit of being more efficient and effective because it reduced travel time for the members of staff that were going to court to seek those orders. Also, proactivity around MARAC, which I've touched on. We've continued in terms of our response around MATAC, which is our programme to deal with and either support offenders of domestic abuse through that multi-agency tasking and coordinating response to it, which we've delivered. Domestic violence disclosure schemes is two-sided. Sometimes that is known as Clare's Law. Within that, we've seen an increase over previous years from 2015, which is very low, through to 2020. That is North Yorkshire Police taking that positive, proactive approach to let people who may be living in a domestic abuse, situation where we anticipate it may be abusive because of the previous history of one of the partners, and we would proactively go and inform that person so that they can make an informed choice, an informed decision about the environment and the situation that they're living with, to try and reduce them becoming a victim, or to make sure that they have adequate support and moving forward in relation to that. And the graph on the right hand side shows the difference between our approach and the other element to Clare's Laws, where members of the public can make that request for that information about their partner. We know during COVID a lot of the schools closed because of the lockdown, but throughout COVID we maintained Operation Compass. We were still passing the information to schools. We were passing the information about domestic abuse incidents to the 0 to 19 service and midwives, because they were still engaging with families. They were still engaging with children, and schools, in terms of the staff, the designated safeguarding leads, were still engaged with a lot of the pupils through different mediums, and not just the classroom. And that was something that has been welcomed by our partners within education in relation to that, which is really positive. And on the basis of that and the work and the outcomes, that is something that we've already decided that we're going to do as a benefit, is continue to deliver Operation Encompass during school holidays, whereas previously that is something that we wouldn't have done before. In terms of outcomes and initiatives, I've touched on around the engagement and the forums that we've had around the Domestic Abuse Silver Group. Our domestic abuse forums have now started again, supported by one of our domestic abuse coordinators. That is supported and driven by our operational group to make sure that the information is being shared. And since last year, we saw the curation and the establishment of our stalking intervention team, which we're able to set up as a result of some precept funding. That team have been proactive. They've delivered training across the force. They're providing tactical advice and investigative support to investigations connected to stalking. And they've completed some audits in relation to the reports that we've seen, which have contributed towards our stalking action plan to improve our response even further in relation to that. We've also seen the domestic abuse scrutiny panel starting again, and again that's scrutiny through partners of our response to domestic abuse incidents and reports that we receive, be it occurrences or crimes, and based around an appropriate way. During COVID, one of the positive elements that we've been able to deliver in force is around the training of domestic abuse matters. Through some funding that we were able to secure in late 2019, and then through the development of it.
Can you start to round up a little bit, because I want to bring Jenny in. I'm not sure how many more slides you've got for us.
Okay. In terms of the domestic abuse training, so we've been able to train over 650 members of staff across the force in terms of that frontline response, and we've received feedback in relation to the training, how they've had the training, their responses to how they deal with incidents, and the knowledge, which is seen a significant improvement around levels of confidence and understanding around some of the barriers as to why victims will not report or share that information. And that will recommence in October later on this year for the second phase of their training. We've also delivered our non-molestation order pilot, which is around the recording of non-molestation orders within the National Police database, so that we've got an accurate, up-to-date copy of non-molestation orders that is accessible for our frontline officers and through the support that we've been delivering in the control room. And that again improves the service for the victims that have got non-molestation orders across the force. I think the details that are provided within that slide cover themselves. But in terms of the work that we're doing, that will also lay the foundations, I hope, for some of the other orders that will be coming as a result of the Domestic Abuse Act later on this year and into early parts of next year. Finally, the big element of our response has been around communication. Throughout COVID, we've had a consistent and sustained campaign about keeping our staff informed, but most importantly about keeping the public informed around domestic abuse, where they can get support, who is available, and that's included not only just messages that are being put out on Facebook, but webinars, online sessions in terms of Facebook, and we've had responses as far as the field as Australia. And one of our campaigns, we had over 70,000 responses in terms of views and shares in relation to that. And it's been able to allow us to share some of the proactive initiatives, such as Ask Annie, about people being able to go into pharmacies for help and support if they are a victim of domestic abuse. So certainly throughout COVID, we have remained proactive, engaged to support victims of domestic abuse, worked with our partners to ensure that we've been able to deliver a consistent delivery of service to them, and signposting people to those additional support agencies if they would not been able to contact the police as well in relation to IDAS support and victims as well. And Commissioner, that brings the presentation that I've got for you to a conclusion if there's any questions.
Good. I don't think there's any questions from me, and I'm just conscious in terms of time. We've got to bring Jenny Newbury in now. Does anybody have any quick questions? No? Okay, Jenny, you're on.
Thank you, Philip. I will dive back into sharing my screen, and if you are of a similar opinion, I will start from where I left off.
Yep.
If that's okay. So I was just coming to the fact that this graph shows clear correlations in relation to increased referrals into our domestic abuse victim support service following key COVID-19 related milestones. So milestone 1 on the graph is the national lockdown, which commenced on the 23rd of March. Milestone B is support bubbles being introduced in June 2020. L is licensed premises reopening in July 2020. 2 is the second national lockdown, which commenced in November. And 3 is the third national lockdown, which commenced in January. And E is the Euros in June to July 2021. So this graph, as you can tell, shows that obviously the volume of referrals into our support services significantly increased during the pandemic, and referrals overall do remain very high, but now appear to be levelling out in terms of they are not continuing to increase in the way that we have seen during the pandemic. However, that's with a note of caution, because we may obviously see referrals increase again over the next few months based on previous annual seasonal increases and as lockdown and social distancing restrictions move. So I'll move on to the 4th slide. So this is still in relation to our domestic abuse victims community-based service, and it shows you some of the key outputs that we measure in relation to the service. And what I wanted to do is highlight the differences between 2020-21 and 2019-20. So you'll see from these tables that referrals into our services have increased significantly, and by significantly, it's an 80% increase between 1920 and 2021. So that's the equivalent of an additional 4,000 referrals. In terms of police referrals, which isn't specifically on the slide, those increased into service by 20%. So previously, about 43% of our referrals were from the police, but in 2020-21, that went up to 63% of referrals. In terms of high risk, proportions stayed relatively similar. So between 1920 and 2021, at around the 50% mark. And repeat referrals remained similar as well over the years. What's also really positive is that our engagement rates remained high. So they were 95% in 1920 and then 93% in 2021. So we were converting referrals into service into engaged clients at a consistent rate during the pandemic. Average days in service, which is on this slide, again remained relatively static. However, generally clients required much more intensive support during the pandemic due to additional complexities, for example, court delays and the increased necessity to be in close proximity to the perpetrator. Caseloads, which also isn't on the slide, but in 2020-21 they far exceeded Safeli's recommended levels of approximately 25. At the 1st of April in 2021, IDVAs had an average caseload of 76 clients compared to 56 in April 2020. So these referral increases have only been manageable due to a combination of the fact that we've moved to remote delivery, so telephone and online support in the main, and the fact that the OPFCC were able to secure additional Ministry of Justice COVID-19 emergency funding to employ 5 additional IDVAs during 2021. And we've also been able to secure a further 700k from the Ministry of Justice IDVA fund to employ 10 additional IDVAs and a lead practitioner until March 2023. So we've been able to secure those resources, and we're relatively confident that we can manage these increased volumes and caseloads moving forward. But obviously there are pressures on the system, not the least of which is the challenge in terms of retaining and recruiting new IDVAs, because obviously the pressures of these services are significant, and we've seen We've seen our IDVAs choose to hand notice in, and it's been challenging to recruit given that there are only so many IDVAs that are fully trained and ready to start service. So I'll move on to my fifth slide. So this is service impact, which is really important for us because this is about outcomes for the individuals who are in service. And what we wanted to assure is that actually this isn't where the impact was being felt. So our service impact for clients is evidenced through the extent to which self-scores across 9 categories of need increase on service exit when compared to self-scores at initial assessment. So across the categories of need, the proportion of clients exiting the service reporting positive change has either remained consistent or increased. So we haven't seen a negative impact from a COVID perspective or the period of time in which we've been in pandemic on the outcomes that individuals have reported in service, which is very positive. We've seen a minor decrease in relation to empowerment, but it's a 1% decrease. So we're really comfortable with the impact in terms of outcomes for our victims. Service continued to receive excellent client feedback as well in 2021, with proportions of clients reporting having things like their cope and recovery goals met going up by 8%. So you'll see from the figures in the second table that there's been minimum impact on victim satisfaction with the services, which again is very reassuring given the considerable increases in volumes into the services. So I don't propose to say anything more about the domestic victims community-based service. Philip, is there any questions at that point before I move on to the perpetrator services?
Any questions, anyone? No, okay, move on to the next one.
I'll move on to the next slide. So this is our adult perpetrators of domestic abuse service. So referrers into this voluntary programme have showed no clear correlation with COVID milestones. So where we saw significant correlation in terms of referrals into our victim service, we haven't seen the same in terms of our adult perpetrators service. However, having said that, referrals have increased significantly by 49% during 2020-21. Police referrals have remained proportionately static, so around a third of referrals that we receive coming from the police. And our engagement rates have slightly increased, which again is positive considering the circumstances. So they've gone up to 71% in 2020-21. Caseloads have remained slightly higher than recommended, with 25 clients per FTE project worker, but again, that's not seen a significant impact in relation to COVID. That is pre-COVID levels. In terms of average days in service, again, we've seen no significant increase. However, Foundation, our provider, has had to make significant changes to their service delivery to engage with perpetrators meaningfully during the pandemic. So they've had to introduce a triage and on-hold cohort to be able to provide fortnightly risk and welfare checks for individuals in service but not actually able to be on programme due to restrictions. So they've been providing triage and support to access other services during that period. They've also worked with national guidance to develop a new 26-week virtual group programme, which was developed and launched in Q3. And we've got 3 virtual groups running concurrently with tablets on loan to clients to enable access, which again is a positive progression. In terms of emergency accommodation, this has seen a significant change. So we've seen significant utilisation increases. So 123 nights between 15 perpetrators in 2020-21 in comparison to a 0 use in 2019-20. So a significant increase in the use of emergency accommodation. So again, I'll move on to our outcomes in relation to the service. So again, really important for us that we still retain those positive outcomes, which is self-assessed by individuals. So this, like our victim service, is clients the impact for clients is evidenced through the extent to which they self-score against 9 categories of need and increase on service exit in comparison to the self-scores that they make on initial assessment. So again, we're really happy to be able to report that across the categories of need, the proportion of clients exiting service reporting a positive change has either remained consistent with pre-COVID levels or it's increased. So, for example, relationships, which is our family, friends and children outcome, has seen a 15% increase. We have seen a minor decrease in one of the outcomes, which is in relation to well-being, so at physical, mental and emotional well-being, which was a 5% decrease. But again, within levels of tolerance, considering the situation. So we're really content with those results. The service has also continued to receive excellent client feedback in 2020-21, although we have seen a slight reduction in the volume or also the proportion of clients who say that they would recommend the service to others. That's a 6% decrease, but overall we've maintained the proportions of individuals who say that their cope and recovery goals have been met and that they've had an overall positive experience with the service. So again, very positive. I'll move on to our young persons perpetrator service, unless there are any questions in relation to the adult service.
Any questions? No, move on, Jenny.
Yeah, okay. So referrals into the young people's domestic abuse perpetrator service have reduced 7% in 2020-21. This is despite the reported from NYP that disclosures of child and adolescent to parent violence and abuse and those to children's social care have increased. So work is ongoing to raise awareness of the service offer, and this has already seen an increase in referrals during Q1 of this financial year. National research by Respect has also demonstrated that some families have experienced a reduction in child and adolescent to parent violence and abuse during the pandemic, as common triggers such as school attendance and peer pressures have been reduced during that time. In relation to engagement for this service, so although initially virtual delivery was seen as positive by young people, this began reducing and their levels of engagement and attention were significantly reduced as the period of time that they were engaged in service went on. So this has been an area where we've struggled to maintain people in service. Despite this, however, the client feedback has remained positive. So where individuals have remained in service, both the young person and their parents or guardians have reported positive impact, which is great. We've also been able to support IDAS to act on recommendations to improve the service in relation to follow-up. So we've identified suitably trained volunteers to conduct welfare checks on families post-service. So again, making sure that we're checking up on families, that the positive impact remains for a more medium and longer term. So that takes me to the end of my presentation. If there are any questions in relation to the young perpetrator service.
Any questions? No. Okay. We'll move on to the next thing. Can I thank Alan and yourself, Jenny, for your presentations, the time you put together. I think there's a lot going on there. It's interesting how COVID's impact and those cycles through there, and I don't think we're through this yet, working through. So it's obviously clearly having some different impacts in terms of the sort of services and the sort of obviously the perpetrators as well. Good. OK, so that moves on to, I think, item 6, which is North Yorkshire Police. And I think ACC Butterfield is earmarked to talk about this. You're earning your corn today, Lindsay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just bear with me while I share my screen. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that. OK, so the first slide talks us through contacting the police, and this relates to 999 call volumes and call handling. So we've touched on this already at the start of the meeting, but just to give the 12-month context, I'll talk through this slide. So our service level target to answer 999 calls is 10 seconds, and that's the aim is to answer 90% of our calls within 10 seconds, and that's set out in the national agreement. We need to comply with that by providing a primary line, a secondary line and an alternative line to enable those calls to be routed. We also have a critical line for BT to contact us in case there are any issues with our emergency call handling. So the performance data on this slide shows the call volumes for the last 12 months, so from July 2020 through to June 2021. And what you can see there in the boxes are the 999 call volumes, so 87,660. The percentage answered within the target time, so 53.26% answered within that 10-second target time, and those answered outside of the target time. I think, Commissioner, we've already touched on this meeting in terms of our call handling and the challenges that continues to present, and we absolutely acknowledge that's not where we want to be around our call handling performance, and there are a number of measures in place to address some of these issues. You can see on the right hand side there is a little bit of detail around the last 30 days. So up to the 18th of July, the average time to answer a 999 call was 26 seconds. And again, the average answer time of over 30 seconds were experienced during early hours of the morning and late hours of the evening. And that coincides with the overtime request that came through to yourself in terms of additional funding to make sure we've got people in place to answer those calls at the key time. We have seen some significant pressures over weekends, so this presentation was prepared last week and it talks about the 17th and 18th of July having that longer average speed of answer and higher call volumes. We now know, having gone through another weekend, that actually Saturday we saw the highest number of 999 calls ever received by North Yorkshire Police at 470 calls presented. So that trend is absolutely continuing. And the charts at the bottom of the page cover calls that were answered on our primary line and the average time taken to answer those calls. So it's a repetition of some of the information that's presented above. When we move on to 101, you can see there again, the information is presented in a very similar way around the call volumes for the last 12 months, so July 2020 through to June of this year. And again, you can see the total number of 101 calls presented, so 164,014 calls presented. Call abandoned is the number of calls that are either abandoned by the public, and that could be because they're no longer prepared to wait. It could be because they use one of the other options, such as the callback options, or it actually could be when we've transferred it to another line to enable that call to be answered. That's all included in that calls abandoned figure. And I think it's really important we understand the breakdown of that as we move forward. So we understand how many of those calls are abandoned by the public versus how many of those groupings are actually by our own process. And we were able to present that information back. In terms of our 101 performance, you can see there our target time to answer is 2 minutes. 36.7% of our calls were answered within that agreed time. And again, it's showing 40% outside of that SLA, with a number of other calls routed through other means. And similarly to the 999 performance slide, we can see that in the 30 days up to the 18th of July this year, the average time to answer that 101 call was just under 5 minutes. So it's significantly longer than where we would want to be in terms of that 2-minute target. And again, yet more calls answered outside of the service level agreement than within it. I don't think we dispute that. And again, that's part of the ongoing work around the control room performance. And as you would expect, higher number of calls means that we've also seen that higher abandonment rate as well. And that again is depicted below in terms of calls answered and calls abandoned by month and day, and then the average time taken to answer those calls. Moving on to the next slide then, this shows our policing response. So from the time that that call is received into the control room to the time that officers or staff are dispatched to the scene. So in terms of our immediate grade calls for service, this is where it's typically a 999 call and there's an immediate threat to life. We're averaging 11 minutes and 40 seconds in rural locations and 8 minutes and 2 seconds in urban areas. And that's from the point that the officer is dispatched to them arriving at the incident. Where it talks about the lead time being 6 minutes 15, that starts at the moment that call is answered by a member of our control room staff. And clearly, depending on the seriousness of the incident or the amount of information that needs to be captured, sometimes the calls can take longer in order for the staff to understand exactly what we're dealing with and make sure that we dispatch the right resource. But overall, from call to officers or staff being at the scene in this period, those timeframes are higher than the 2-year average. And in urban areas, that's 38 seconds, and in rural areas, it's lower by 8 seconds. The other grade of incidents, the priority grade, is our response times average just under 21 minutes. But it's accepted that there might be a delay between the call being logged and the dispatch of officers or staff to priority incidents based on resource availability. So our immediate grades would always take priority. And our priority grades, apologies for the confusion in the language, would clearly be the next type of incident that we would deploy to, but we would always look to resource our immediate grades first. When we look at the immediate grade response, in terms of our deployments in the last 3 months, there has been an increase in the number of immediate grade deployments. And when we start to unpick some of the detail behind that, we can see that that's apparent in relation to antisocial behaviour and public safety and welfare related themes. So those figures show some of that information in terms of the immediate grade volumes and the priority grade volumes. And you can see the slight increase there in terms of the immediate grades, and actually no significant change in the priority graded deployments during our past 90 days. Just breaking down some of that demand a little bit further, those tables show the number of immediate and the number of priority graded incidents in relation to antisocial behaviour, crime and public safety and welfare related issues. So that gives the total number of incidents side at the bottom of that slide. It's a really important one because that shows that we have deployed 2,780 more resources to public safety and welfare incidents than crime, but we actually spend longer once we're at a crime incident compared to a public safety and welfare. And I think that's a really important point to draw out in terms of demand for the teams. So our initial response to communities needs to be considered not just on that increase in volume, but the type of deployment as well that we're actually attending. Okay, the next slide gives us our general crime volumes, crimes committed over the last 3 years, 12 months and then 90 days. So the table on the left-hand side shows us that volume of crime recorded on our systems in the last 3 years. And we can see from those figures that around 65% of crime types fall into violence, theft or arson and criminal damage. So that's our trend over the last 3-year period. Within the last 12 months, we can see that there is an increase in proportions of public order offences and fraud. And I know we've presented previously in this forum around some of the fraud types and opportunities that have been presented during COVID. And then also the 90-day data shows that we are actually seeing that increase in violence. So I appreciate that's been touched on in some of Alan's presentation around domestic abuse and safeguarding, and I know that's a substantive agenda item for PAM next month, but absolutely in line with the increase that we're seeing in the last 90 days. The box at the bottom of that page just looks at potential impacts through COVID. So in the last 15 months, we see just over 9,200 fewer crimes committed and reported in North Yorkshire than in the 15 months prior to COVID-19. So just an important note to make in terms of our demand during the pandemic. The next slide gives you information of our crimes over the last 12-month period, and also annotates on there the impact of the lockdown, or certainly the timings of the lockdown. And we see certainly for lockdown 1 a reduction in terms of crimes reported. The number of crimes committed in the last 12 months fell by 7% in comparison to the previous 12 months. And we think that the number of crimes recorded by North Yorkshire Police in the past 12 months fell by 0.3% in comparison to the previous 12 months. And what we see there is a difference between those figures as being the result of continued historic reporting of crimes, which are typically sexual and violent crimes. And clearly we would always encourage members of the public to report those offences to us, whether historic or not. Moving on to the areas where we have seen some of the increases then, so violence against the person, again for 4% reduction showing on that slide. Again, interesting to note the impact of lockdowns on the reporting. Sexual offences, that's showing a 21% reduction from July 19 to June 20, and then through to July 20 to June 21. And the acquisitive crime, the fraud, theft and robbery offences, a 7% reduction in the crimes that have been reported to North Yorkshire Police during those periods. We've touched on already some of the pressures around violent crime. I think the purpose of this slide is just to give a taster in terms of what will be covered in August PAM meeting, but I think it also illustrates really well just how broad ranging the topic of violent crime is. So we've got everything in there from assaults on emergency workers through to domestic abuse, through to county lines, knife crime, nighttime economy and licensing issues. So I know there's a lot more coming from Superintendent Norton next month in relation to violent crime. Are there any particular questions or issues today, Commissioner, that you'd like me to cover?
No, I don't think so. I think you've got it encapsulated there. Obviously, very interested with next month's meeting, how we drill down there. But I think the other thing is how we actually deal with violent crime as well. The government itself is concerned. The chief and I both had separate meetings with the policing minister, and there's a clear direction from Downing Street in terms of violent crime and obviously offences against women and girls, and there's just going to be a whole load of pressure, both from me and from Downing Street, really, in terms of making sure that we are addressing this as effectively as we can. And to some extent, we're driven by some events outside our control. County Line's been an example of that.
No problem, thank you. As I say, we'll cover that in much more detail next month for you. I don't intend to dwell on this slide because it talks about investigative outcomes in relation to domestic abuse, and I know Alan's covered quite a lot of detail in relation, so I'll move on if that's okay.
Yep.
The next section relates to victims' journey. So this is how we treat, engage and support victims of crime. And it's really important just to highlight our management system that we use. So we record all of our crimes and incidents on a system called Niche. And it's very helpful in terms of being able to capture elements around victims' journey. However, the victim code is slightly more complex because what we have there is a single victim can be subject of multiple crimes as part of a single investigation, or the victim can be subject to multiple crimes over a time period, each subject to a different investigation. So being able to report on the victim journey in a holistic way can be complex. So apologies, there seems to be an issue on that slide in terms of some words missing, but just to give you some reassurance in terms of how we're building some oversight of that victim journey, there is and has been and continues to be dip sampling by Criminal Justice Department, looking at the victim journey and making sure that we are complying with the victim code. We are in the process of building business rules, which means that we will be able to extract that data far more easily from Niche to be able to demonstrate our compliance with the victim code, but also identify any learning and issues that we need to address. We are in the process of building a dashboard, which is essentially management information, and that will be automatically updating and counting victim updates from an investigative perspective, so understanding when and how our victims should be updated and making sure we're complying with that. And then developing that picture of individuals of rights which cannot be subject to data analytics but would require more qualitative assessment, and making sure we've got that consistent approach across the organisation to offer that reassurance that we again are complying with the victim code and that our victims are getting the best possible level of service. And I think it's absolutely important to say that that is in addition to the ongoing supervisory checks. So the expectations are that frontline officers have their workloads checked on a regular basis by their line managers, and actually ensuring that victims are being regularly updated, and the quality of those updates is what we would expect them to be, is already in hand. So this piece of work around building the dashboard and the business rules would overlay the work that is already ongoing by supervisors. In terms of our referrals into supporting victims, then we can see in the information on this slide here that the victims may be referred to external agencies. It's one of 4 of your commission services, Commissioner, whether that is the Independent Sexual and Domestic Abuse Advisors or the IDAS, the service that's commissioned by IDAS, Independent Victim Advisors, which is a commission service by Victim Support, counselling service through community counselling, and restorative justice, which is commissioned and provided by Restorative Solutions. So there are a number of options in terms of support for victims available when they contact North Yorkshire Police. The bottom part of that slide talks about complaints. So these are actually now recorded by your office, Commissioner, but again, it highlights some of the trends that we are seeing. So in terms of Q1, so April to June of this year, 376 contacts with the complaints and recognition team, and the top 5 areas for contact are highlighted there. So number 1 being the general level of service that members of the public are receiving, 53 contacts made in relation to that. Schedule 3 referral to PSD is a formal complaint which would pass to our professional standards department, so 51 contacts have been handled in that way. 48 occasions where there's been an inability to proceed based on insufficient detail, which will go back to the teams for further work. 38 contacts for service recovery or incidents requiring service recovery, and on 28 occasions correspondence has been received, which falls into the bracket of general correspondence. Specifically in relation to investigations, the biggest area there is around evidential procedures. 6 contacts in relation to evidential procedures and 1 in relation to victims code, which I understand would mean a non-compliance by officers in relation to the victims code that we've touched on already. Is really broad. It can be anything from tactical communication, which is documented as a use of force, right through to the use of handcuffs, of parva, through to taser, firearms and lethal force. So where we look at the information that is presented here, we will see the age profile for the last 3 years and the last 12 months is almost identical, with 18 to 34-year-olds being most often the subject to use of force by police. We have seen a small increase in the proportion of reports involving 11 to 17-year-olds, and I know that's an area of specific interest for the use of force working group. However, within that age bracket, 65% of those contacts have comprised tactical communications. So just by way of reassurance, that is that we are talking to those individuals as opposed to any other method of use of force. At the bottom of the slide on the left-hand side, that talks about taser deployment, and again it's depicted in the graph at the bottom right. So throughout the period of the 1st of April 2018 to the end of June 2021, a total of 824 records of taser use. And again, that can include all possible actions, so whether that is actually just the drawing of the taser, right through to the taser actually being fired. They all need to be recorded. We see use of this tactic is less prevalent in the 11 to 17-year age group, which represents 12% of all use of force, but 5% of those whom taser was used at any stage. And again, that information is fed through in the use of force working group. And at the top right-hand side there, that just gives you a breakdown in terms of impact factors at the time that force was used. So we see alcohol being present on 52% of recorded uses of force, drugs at 34% and mental health at 31%. And I think we would all probably agree that there would be and most anticipated frequently recorded factors. But that's what we're seeing through that information. With those that are aged between 11 and 17 years, again, they are the predominant factors, but at much lower proportions. And actually being in a crowd is a greater factor for that age group. And then the final slides from me relate to our workforce. So just some correction around the figures where we look at police officers. Our budgeted position for officers is 1,567. And that's the same for our annual FTE budget. And our actual officer numbers, the latest information provided by Finance, is currently sitting at 1529. So there is some movement in those figures throughout the month based on starters and leavers, which I think explains the disparity in the numbers that are recorded on the slide there. But 1567 for budgeted FTE and 1529 for actual officer numbers. And you know, Commissioner, in terms of our plans around recruitment and making sure that we are maintaining our recruitment plans as we move through the year. Again, the slide highlights that we are reviewing our projections and recruitment plans. Retirements are being reviewed on a regular basis, making sure that we understand any potential impacts of a pension remedy on early police officer retirement and that factors into our plans accordingly. And again, for the PCSO numbers, it talks there about the planned targeted work, making sure we understand our projections and recruitment plans. So we know that when we recruit for police officers, we will typically see a number of PCSOs successful through those campaigns. And again, in June of this year, 5 of our PCSOs resigned from the PCSO role to become student officers. The final box in that section looks at police staff, specials and volunteers. We can see there the staff figures have reduced by 2 from the previous month. Again, that will always be the case. We will always see that fluctuation as we move through the month and the year based on starters and leavers. I think reassuringly, our recruitment of special constables continues, with our next intake being scheduled for July 2021. So we're currently 112 specials and 199 in terms of volunteers. The bottom section of that slide just gives our latest workforce diversity. So 95.48% of our workforce is white, 3.75% defined as Black, Asian or minority ethnic, and 0.77% not stated. You then see the gender split of male and female, and followed by the generational split of the workforce. And the final slide, Commissioner, just shows the impact around COVID-19 sickness absence. So the latest information that I've had in relation to COVID is slightly more up to date than the information on our slides here. So in terms of our rolling count of coronavirus sickness, we've seen a decline since the 15th of July. As of yesterday, there are currently 22 employees that are off due to coronavirus. And by that, I mean actually testing positive for coronavirus. And then breaking that down further in terms of self-isolation, we've seen a significant reduction in those numbers. So I think on the slide there, it shows 92 currently self-isolating. Actually, when we've looked at that yesterday, that's reduced down to 47. And reassuringly, of those, a significant percentage of those are able to work from home and are doing so effectively. But clearly, we continue to monitor the impact of COVID sickness absence and self-isolation on our workforce. And at the bottom, Commissioner, that just gives a little bit of information around more broadly in terms of sickness reason. So in the last 12 months, the split there between physical sickness and psychological illness, and then some further detail in terms of the average impact for hours or working hours that would be lost. And again, finally, the top 5 absence reasons, stress being number 1, followed closely by COVID, anxiety and work-related stress and back pain. So, and I think that concludes my presentation. Commissioner, are there any questions?
It's fairly comprehensive, as always. I'm glad we're picking up on violence at the next meeting, and that will be interesting. In terms of questions I have for you, to be honest, I haven't. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Does anybody else have a question? Chief Constable shaking her head, but she knows all the answers. Right, I can't see any hands up, so we will move on to North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. And I believe we've got Stuart Simpson with us. Hello, Stuart.
Commissioner. Yeah.
The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll just give me a couple of minutes and I'll share my screen. Can someone just let me know that you can see my slides?
Yeah, I can see that.
Lovely. Firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to showcase the training section of the Fire and Rescue Service. So training is key for everything that happens within the service, and it ensures that staff across the service can fulfil their roles safely and effectively. We start by taking the care priorities from the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner plan and also the content of Ambition 2025, and we try and ensure that we include this as much as possible through all the courses that we deliver. And this is really important for the new starters within the service. It's important that they understand the culture of the service and the values, and we make a real focus on setting out the initial courses and making sure that people understand what they're joining and what they're coming into. The assurance strategy and the training tactical plan allow the section to develop in line with the key objectives and priorities for the service, and that really dictates the areas that we're going to move into and want to explore, and ultimately that gives us the training delivery plan. And this is very much around promoting the principles of intent-based leadership. We're trying to remove that bureaucracy and develop creativity in everything that we do within that training delivery plan. And ultimately, training, we have a vision for exemplary training across the service. We want to embed a culture of personal and professional pride with respect for all, and that's what I believe we're doing at the moment. I thought it'd be useful just to explain a little bit about the sort of staffing structure and the responsibility structure within training section. So obviously there's myself, who works to Area Manager Jonathan Dyson as the Assurance Directorate, and I have a Station Manager Steve Harris, and between us we look after everything to do with operational training. And if you look at the first four columns on the left hand side, that is actually the training staff that work out of training centre to deliver the operational training. There's 4 watch managers and then there's 8 crew managers. 4 of those are designated as district crew managers. So they are the point of contacts out on the districts to make sure that any district training is met. But ultimately they work to the watch managers. So I hold the watch managers accountable for delivering that maintenance training in each of the districts. They also, each watch manager and each team within that has references. So if we take the left-hand one, that watch manager is responsible for breathing apparatus, fire behavioural training and tactical ventilation. They all tend to go together because they're all to do with wearing breathing apparatus. Then they also pick up the Learn Pro, which is the e-learning platform that we use to disseminate a lot of our knowledge and understanding across the service. So that's the main operational training. On the right hand side, second from right, is the driver training. So we have an operational watch manager who's responsible for all the driver training, and they have a team of 2 civilian instructors who enable them to deliver and facilitate all the driver training across the service. We also have an incident command team which consists of 2 watch managers, and they primarily deliver a lot of the L1, the initial incident command training for the officers that sit in the front seat of the fire engine and command the incidents in the initial stages. But then they also facilitate the different levels of incident command training as you go up through the organisation, and they also deliver assessments and updates. It's also worth pointing out that within that operational structure, we've had a lot of temporary staff. There's been a lot of new staff coming in earlier this year, which has helped put a bit of stability in. Majority of them are now permanent in position. We've still got a few temporaries, but generally we've got a much more stable structure than we perhaps had at the end of last year. Just to point out, I also look after the Leadership and Development Advisor. So I'm working quite closely with Enable to develop some leadership and development frameworks. And I also have the exercise physiologist whose primary role is to ensure that the staff across the service, operational staff, are fully fit and meeting the minimum standard. And if that's not the case, he works hard to get them back up through development plans to the required standard. I'd now like to take the opportunity just to invite Natalie Hall, who is a recent trainee on the whole-time firefighter trainee course that was just been completed. And she's going to tell you a little bit about how she found that course and what she thought to her time at training centre.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for inviting me to speak. As you said, I've just finished, I've started my first week on station now, but the training course, I absolutely loved it. I had a fantastic time. Obviously, I learned a lot as well over the 12 weeks. From kind of day one, all the instructors were really clear that they wanted to be a course where we could approach them and we could ask questions, and we felt confident that that they were there to help and support us, and they effectively wanted us to be to learn everything we needed to learn, make sure that we were safe, effective firefighters, and that continued throughout the course. So when we were going out and doing different scenarios, they teach us the theory behind it. We'd go out and do some practical sessions, and then we do it in kind of real time as well. So there was a lot of practice for the various different things that we had to learn. But the really beneficial thing for us is that no one was scared to ask questions or to have a go at something. So it meant that after different scenarios, we'd have a debrief and we'd have different learning points. So instead of things being flagged up as mistakes or you've done something wrong, it was very much, it's a learning point and everyone can learn from that. So when you do some scenarios, obviously not everyone sees everything that happens, and we would come together and we'd discuss what happened, what the learning points were, so that, all of the trainees learn from anything. And that was really to just make us as effective as possible, really. But it was a very positive way to do it, rather than, you didn't get shouted at, or it wasn't like, oh, you've made a mistake, you shouldn't do that. It was very much like, why did you do it? Let's talk about it. Let's see what a more effective way to do it was. Or if there's a safety concern, why there's a safety concern. So we all understood the differences within that. So that was really, really positive. Each week as well, we'd have one-to-ones with different instructors. So depending on what you were doing that week, so if it was BA, you'd have an instructor that you'd been working with you on BA. So you got one-to-one feedback, which I found really, really beneficial. And that was a great opportunity to see how you were doing, see if there was anything you think you needed to work on from their perspective, but also from your perspective. It was just a really open and honest conversation with the instructors. And then from that, if you need any additional support, you could ask for that and you'd get it. And I found that I was quite confident to ask any of the instructors for additional help. So at one point with road traffic collisions, I needed a bit of additional support on that. And Chris, one of the trainers, spent 2 evenings of his own time after we'd finished for the day going through some theory and then some practical. And I asked for it, and a couple of the other trainees got involved in that as well. So everyone was very open and very much encouraging us to ask for more help if we needed it, because obviously, as you can imagine, there's a lot to learn in 12 weeks, and so you don't always remember everything. The trainers were definitely there to help, and I think everyone was approachable, and it was just, you felt very kind of respected. And they said throughout the course, that at the end of the course, we're going to be their colleagues. So to not think that of us as, we're the instructors, we know everything, and we're here to help you and support you, but we're your colleagues after that. And I think that definitely has come through. And I now, having finished, would feel quite confident going to any of them now to ask for help or support or advice on anything within the role, which I think is, and I say that about all of them as well, there was a big group of instructors. So I think that positive atmosphere definitely came through, and we had a really great relationship with the instructors, but also within our trainee group as well. So as a whole environment, and it was a residential course as well, so we spent a lot of our time there. It was a really positive environment to be in, and I learned obviously a lot from that. But it was fantastic, and I can't fault it really. Throughout the course, we were always supported with anything that we needed, and I definitely benefited from that, and I know that a lot of the other trainees did as well. So yeah, and I've come off the course feeling confident in my ability and ready to kind of obviously get started, but also I know there's lots of other skills to kind of continue to learn as well, in a more practical sense. But yeah, it was a fantastic course, and yeah, I can't fault it really, to be honest. And Stuart's not just made me say that either.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And we're delighted to have you as one of our trainee whole-time firefighters. And I look forward to visiting you at some time and seeing you being put through the paces.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. I appreciate your attendance. That was useful. Just move on. I'll give you a flavour of the training courses. So I suppose the first question to ask is, why do we train in the areas that we train in? It's very much based on the risk that we have across the county. So if I could perhaps give you an example, we do the basic operational training, but if you took York, the water risk within York is particularly high. And so we do specific training in that area to make sure that we've got the adequate resources in the appropriate areas to negate that risk. So that's basically all the training we do should be directed and is directed against the risk that we perceive across the county. So if we take operational training, two main elements, that acquisition, and obviously we've had Tilly talking about the whole-time trainee course, which is done in a 13-week block. Actually, for the on-call, the staff who have primary employment elsewhere, it's quite a big undertaking for them to do some of their initial training. So we do a 2-week Safe to Ride course, and then we build up modules after that. So they'll come on initially after the 2-week Safe to Ride, they'll do a 2-day fire behaviour training course, and then they'll come back for a 5-day breathing apparatus course. And so we build up the core skills by just asking them to come back for 2 or 3, maybe worst cases, a week at a time, which hopefully they can then fit within their own personal life and the personal employment. The other side to that is the refresher training. So we have what we call an operational license that currently consists of breathing apparatus, because it's risk critical, and also incident command and driver training, driving. And so that we bring people back really to give a little bit of input, but more around assessment and validation to make sure that they have maintained that qualification and are still operating at the correct standard. Move on to incident command. I'll talk a little bit more about incident command in a bit more detail because we've changed that quite significantly. But basically, there's 4 levels of incident command. And so we ensure that we train the initial acquisition courses. We do 2-yearly assessments, and then we also do 2-yearly updates to make sure that all the incident commanders at whatever level they're operating at have the right qualification and the correct skills. Driver training, again, a wide range of training. This can be anything from light driving assessment for people who just joined the service. We'll do the large goods vehicle training courses and also the examinations at the end of that. And then we also have emergency response driving, which is ultimately to allow drivers to drive on lights and horns. And then we do lots of specialist training. So there'll be 4x4 training for any vehicles that go off road. There'll be trailer towing for if we've got the boat, for example, is on a trailer, so we need to be able to move that around safely. Leadership and development courses, and we work with the leadership and development advisor and link into Yorkshire Accord coaching and mentoring schemes. And going forward, we're going to be working very closely with people services to develop hopefully a leadership and development framework. So moving on to the strengths. What are the strengths of the training section? We've done a lot of work to adopt the National Operational Guidance. This is a national piece of work that is really sort of at the forefront for the Fire and Rescue Service, joining a lot of services, so we're all working to exactly the same guidance. We've got a project officer within service who's done a lot of really good work and has assisted our training team to update not only our courses, but also our learning materials, especially in Learn Pro, and we're just about there. And we had over 200 different modules, and we rationalised those down to approximately 50 now. which is far more user-friendly. It's got all the pertinent information from the National Operation Guidance in there, and hopefully it'll be really, really good. The general view around National Operational Guidance is we're more about facilitation, assessment and validation, rather than just having the training centre just providing input and instruction. Yes, there is some of that, but it's also about assessing and validating, and that's where we want to go. Because the Central Programme Office, who oversee the National Operation Guidance, found out that our whole-time trainee course was going to be not compliant, they were really keen to come and have a look. So they came to visit us and saw some of the work that we're doing at the on the whole-time course, and we're really impressed with that, and we've got some positive feedback. Another strength that we have is within the region. So we're part of the Yorkshire and Humber region. I have a really good relationship with the other group managers from the other 3 services, and we meet regularly to just discuss ideas, look at any national things that are coming out, and work together to share information and share products as well. And probably the best example of that is the Instant Command Framework. So I started in post and training probably just under a year ago. Had some concerns about the way we delivered instant command training. We were also got National Operation Guidance, and when we did a gap analysis against that, it did identify some areas that we needed to fill. And again, through discussions with the region, they all had similar concerns. Humberside had actually already come up with a framework, so we discussed that framework, and we've all adopted the same frameworks, very slightly differently, but the general principles are all exactly the same. We've obviously all got slightly different demands and different makeups of the service, but ultimately we're going to hopefully have a regional framework that will be pretty much the same, which has some massive benefits, because if we're actually working over border, we know that that instant command, whatever service you're in, is going to be the same. It also allows us to do, certainly at level 4 at strategic level, we only have 4 strategic managers. So to be able to do meaningful training is quite difficult, whereas across the service, we can do that now and share that, and we're all working to the same level. And that's been borne out in just a couple of weeks ago. We had a regional event where we actually opened up to group managers to share that learning. And it was a really, really good event that we couldn't run on our own. Just picking up on the whole-time trainee course, this was the first one we'd run in 10 years. We ran one last year, but did it on the apprenticeship scheme and had the Fire Service College deliver that. So it was a challenge, but I believe it's a strength insofar as we delivered it really well. It was a blank piece of paper. We were able to build up exactly what we wanted. We took a lot of Ambition 2025 and put that into the course. So we incorporated prevention and protection training, whereas traditionally that would have been perhaps a bolt on our module even after the course. We put that fairly early on in the first 2 or 3 weeks, and that allowed us to build scenarios that weren't just focused on operational training, but were also focused on trainees going to an automatic fire alarm, identifying some fire safety issues, and they were able to practice what they would do about it, what they do there and then, what they would refer on, and the same around safeguarding. So we built in some safeguarding scenarios. So they think they're going to a fire in a building. It actually turns out to be quite a small fire, but then there's some safeguarding issues, and that was really intuitive and insightful for us to see how they actually dealt with that, and hopefully that's really realistic training. So that's what we want them to do when they go out onto the districts and the stations. And the final point really is the learning from national incidents. So there's a couple of organisations, the National Organisational Learning and the Joint Organisational Learning. So National Organisational Learning is all about learning within the fire service, and Joint Organisational Learning is what we can learn between the emergency services. And we get regular updates from those 2 groups. And what we do is we have a tactical leadership team subgroup, and we analyse all those, look at the context and the risk for North Yorkshire, and where appropriate, we'll then put measures in place to make sure whether it's a policy decision or whether it's a training issue, and feed that out and make sure that gets incorporated. And that's in addition to learning from all our own incidents. So we regularly review our incidents, and we also, if it's a large incident, we'll actually have a structured debrief, and we formalise that learning. And then the other area that we learn from is the national incidents such as Grenfell, Manchester Arena. Milford Haven was a tragic incident which involved a water rescue training scenario where unfortunately a firefighter died. So we analyse all that report and how it affects and could affect North Yorkshire, and we build that into the training and the risk assessments, and also Manchester Cube. Challenges then. I've identified selection testing because, again, that was something that was faced when I first came in, where we were delivering some of the selection tests, the national selection test for recruitment, in slightly different ways. And there was the general approach was a little bit to see as a filter and how many people could we get out of the system. And we've just changed that around totally. It's now done in a very supportive way. Probably one of the best examples is one of the tests you have to take a leg lock. Now, by the letter of the law, it's you should move your leg two rounds down from where you were standing. Now, some people who are short stature really struggle to do that, and in the past they would potentially have failed. Whereas now we're saying, as long as they can do it safely, then they're absolutely fine. We're not lowering the standards. The standards exactly the same, but we're just approaching it in a more positive and supportive way. And if people do fail the test, they go away understanding exactly which element they can't do, why they can't do it, and what they need to do to come back and hopefully pass it. So that's a real turnaround. And there's also a piece of work that I've asked for within my people partnering plans is to look at the national tests and see if they're actually fit for purpose. They haven't been reviewed for well over 10 years. And I'm just a little bit concerned that when perhaps it's a barrier to attracting the people that we want to get into North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service to meet the values that we've got. So it'd be worth reviewing those. The Fire Standards Board has recently been set up and is now starting to deliver some standards, which is really good. I've just listed 3 that have published recently that pertain to training. One is about operational competence, and again, with all the work we've done against the National Operational Guidance, which is ultimately what that's aimed at, I'm fairly confident we're not too far away with that. And the same with operational learning, as I've outlined earlier. We do a lot of learning, and I'm confident that we're not too far away with that. The one that does cause concern is emergency response driving. They have significantly changed the duration of the course. They've more or less doubled it to producing an emergency response driver. So it's gone from a week to 2 weeks. Because we're primarily an on-call service, that has a significant impact on ensuring that on-call can do those courses. So part of that is to review the driver training section, make sure that we're fit for purpose and we can deliver the new standard. And we're looking at different ways to do that to be easier for the on-call, and whether we do that in modules. So there's various options, and we're trying to be flexible and agile in how we deliver that. The third issue that causes a lot of problems, and I think this is right across the service in many areas, is data. So I've talked about the operational licence regarding refresher training, and we'd like to enhance that. I would like to put more skills onto that, so we've got that assurance that people are qualified in the right areas for their stations and what they need to be able to do. But to do that, we need to have robust, easily accessible data, and ideally this will be in the form of a dashboard. At the moment, we can get the information, but it's a manual process. You run a report and then you have to discount various things. So that's where we really want to be, and I think that's an area that as a service we need to really focus on, and that will give us that ability to enhance the operational licence, for example. And the final challenge that I've identified is the Trainees Analysis. So as I've already outlined, we haven't run a whole-time trainee course for nearly 10 years. The current staffing model for training is probably not set up to deliver whole-time courses. So we need to create that evidence. So I'm working at the moment to look exactly what are the training needs analysis, what do we need to provide, and then what is the capacity that we need to be able to deliver that. And I'll talk a little bit on the next slide or so about different options that we're looking for to try and create that capacity. Opportunities. So we've reviewed the on-call safe to ride course. I'd like to think it's very much in the same vein as the whole-time course and what you heard from Tilly. That is what we're certainly aiming for. We've certainly had some good feedback recently. We've certainly made it more open, more approachable, removed all the sort of slightly militaristic side to it. So I think that's a real opportunity. We just need to keep on top of that and to try and encourage our on-call, potential on-call staff to come onto that course and really enjoy it and have it as a good opportunity to introduce them to the service. We've recently run a trial of that course, 2-week course on a district, and we ran it at Malton. And that worked surprisingly well. There's some issues around the facilities, but we provided some trainers to assist with it, but then also they used the district staff. So it was good that some of the passionate district staff were able to assist in that training arena. So I think that would be really good to look at rolling that out. There's a few provisos about making sure that whoever's leading on that has got the right skills and the right understanding of the quality that we're trying to deliver at training centre. But I think there's some benefit in that. And that would help us with some of the staffing model. That creates some capacity that we could really do with. We've learned a lot from COVID. It has been a real challenge, but I think out of that has come some real opportunities. We realised that we had to maintain service delivery. We had to maintain that training on the core subjects, and we did that by putting interim modules in where we just went and delivered literally the physical bit out in the drill yard, which was safe to do so, and we put a lot of the theory onto Teams and increased the use of the Learn Pro modules. A really good example of that was instant command assessments. Before COVID, we would ask people to drive to our instant command suite in Northallerton, undertake an assessment that's usually about an hour and a half, and then drive back. Well, for some people, that drive can be, if you're coming from Bentham or Scarborough, it can be nearly 2 hours. So now we can do those online. They're literally just as effective as doing them in person, and obviously it saves all that cost of travel and time. So we're trying to apply those, the things we've learned from COVID right across the training delivery spectrum. I've touched on the regional instant command framework, but that worked really well. And I think there's further opportunities to work within the region, and look at collaborative opportunities. So another example of that will be we're working really closely with Huddersfield University, who do a lot of the Yorkshire Ambulance Service paramedic training, and they're keen to come and see what courses we can deliver. So we're looking at, for example, a road traffic collision. So they can come and give their trainee paramedics some exposure into road traffic collisions. And we get the benefit of having medical advice actually in the scenarios, in the drills that we're setting up. So I think things like that would be really, really useful going forward. Learning and development, again, we've got the Leading the Way programme for the recently appointed station managers. And I'd like to grow that, have a really explicit learning development framework for all the different roles within the fire service. And I think working with people services, there's some real opportunities with the talent development team to deliver that. So that will be really good. The other thing that our learning development advisor is looking at is trainer audits. So again, we used to have those when I was in operations probably 8 years ago, and it's twofold really. This is setting up a program so that each trainer knows they're going to get audited, and so that we can give them quality feedback. And whether that be negative or positive, we can understand what they get some feedback to tell them what they need to do, how they need to improve. And we've run this as a bit of a trial through the whole time course, and the trainers really felt it was good because they knew exactly where they were and what they needed to focus on. But it also gives that assurance to the service that actually the quality of the training across the service is absolutely where it needs to be. If not, we can do something about it. So that's something that we've introduced. And finally, opportunities is the exercise physiologist. So we've reviewed the fitness policy. This came in about just over 4 years ago. And whilst it's been good to introduce it and get it up and running, we now have a couple of serial offenders who really struggle and are permanently not meeting the standard. So we're just rewriting the fitness policy to link it to the discipline procedure a bit more explicit than it perhaps already is, so that we can make sure that sorry?
You just
hear me?
It looks like it's my end. I'm just listening to Tom. Can you still hear?
Keep going, I'm nearly there now. So Ames, really, what does the future look like? we're about to embed a maintenance programme across the service. This will fill a gap that we've had for a while, whereby the new trainees that are on acquisition courses go out to station with the latest information. And if you take road traffic collision techniques, for example, existing staff don't get any further input apart from the learning modules. So through the maintenance programme, we're going to be going out to stations. There'll be 6 teams over 3 years, and we'll give a little bit of an update, but it'll be more around that validation to make sure we'll set scenarios up for the stations, and they'll be demonstrating that they've got the skills that we think they've got, and our trainers will be able to validate and assess that. And that'll allow us then to make sure that the training we're delivering is appropriate and is getting the desired outputs and productivity at the end. So that'll be useful. As I've talked about, we'd like to extend the operational licence, and we'll be looking to do so. As I've touched on right at the beginning, the training team are fairly new in post. There's a lot of new people in there. So we'll be looking at developing the team. It's quite a unique power dynamic because there's 4 watch managers and 8 crew managers, whereas on a station you tend to have watch manager, crew managers, so it's very hierarchical. So it's about making sure they're not trying to be top dog, but they're actually looking out for each other. So there's a bit of work going on with that, making sure they've got the right instructor courses so that we can deliver what we need to deliver. And then ultimately, because it is really intense working at training centre, they do a lot of breathing apparatus wherein they are pretty much flat out. It's about looking at succession planning. So we've got plans to potentially detach people for maybe a month, 3 months into districts, allow some of the district staff to come and have a look at training, see if it's what they want to do, see if they're right for us. So there's a lot around that succession planning that I think will be really beneficial. I've talked about embedding a leadership and development framework, working with talent and development team. We need to be a bit more formal on the officer maintenance of competence. We do officer CPD, but if I'm honest, it's a little bit ad hoc. It's probably the first thing that when officers are under pressure to meet deadlines that get sidelined. And so I'm keen to develop that maintenance of competence that is really formalised and is seen as a high priority, that we do need to maintain the competence of our officers across the required skills. I've talked about the review of driver training to ensure it meets the new fire standards board, and that'll be happening. And the next one is a review of the long-term effects of regular.
I could just ask if you can start to round up a little bit, because you're John Foster's next after you.
Yeah, this is literally me penultimate slide, and the last slide is just summary. So literally another minute and I'll be finished. So review long-term effects of regular hot breathing apparatus wearers, because obviously the team, I mean, they enjoy wearing breathing apparatus, and we have to sometimes save them from themselves, but it's about understanding those short, medium and long-term effects. So we'd like to bring a bit more health surveillance into training centres particularly, and to understand a little bit more about the effects on females. And the exercise physiologist is doing some work on the menopause for females, because we're an ageing workforce, and I think that's going to become more prevalent and important as we move forward. I've touched on the review of the national selection tests, so I won't dwell on that. Final slide then. So where are we now, really? I think we've got a highly competent training team at training centre and across the training section. We've got some really skilled leaders in there who can not only deliver the courses, but can move those courses forward. I believe the delivery on the Safe to Ride course is now a really open and healthy learning environment, and we put the past behind us. We successfully delivered the whole time firefighter trainee course, and I think we're leading the way involving P&P. I'm not aware of any of the services that are running scenarios like that. All our learning materials are now NOG compliant, and the service is seen as a national leader in this area. And we've done a full review of incident command, and by introducing a new framework in the accredited courses, I think we've removed a bit of a corporate risk there. So I think that's the positive. I'm happy to take any questions. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Stuart. That's really, really comprehensive and good to know stuff. Tom's got a question.
Thanks, Philip. I've got a few succinct questions, if I may, for Stuart. First one, really great to hear from Natalie there about her experience in training centre, and great to hear that some of the that the culture and the approach to training is improving really well. just like to understand from you, please, how you're evaluating the changes that you've implemented, essentially, to understand how that improvement is taking effect and where further work is required in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, so what we're really starting, so we have a feedback system in place anyway, so they're encouraged to fill feedback forms in, but with the whole time course particularly, I've asked the L&D advisor she meets them anyway as part of the putting them into the competency framework, and so she's going to ask specific questions that we've agreed upon to get their feedback. So she's a little bit remote from the training environment, so hopefully we'll be more open with her, and so we'll analyse the information that we get from that. Going forward, I've talked with people partnering about potential for pulse surveys and looking at other methods to capture that information. So that's, at the moment, a lot of it is feedback forms and actually just talking to people and getting that feedback, but hopefully going forward it'll be more formalised.
That's great. It's good to hear that there's plans in place for that. This morning at EB, we heard about plans for training around equality, diversity and inclusion, which is obviously one of the requirements from HMI, which is great to know that that's coming through now, and hopefully that can be implemented really quickly by colleagues in people services. The question I'd like to ask quickly is just about the quality of training and how obviously there was a recent impact assessment around equality of training. I just wanted to ask about how you're implementing the changes that arose from that, and what success you're having there in improving that situation, please.
I'm not sure I'm saying. Jonathan, do you want to?
Yeah, cheers, Tom. From the perspective of the buildings side, we understand, and as we know, that Simon Garnett-Spence has introduced the development plans to make the buildings more accessible and more obviously in tune with the legislation we need to meet. From a training perspective, this is a large portion now where we are expanding the use of people impact assessments and equality impact assessments across the board. So this isn't just training from an assurance perspective, it's across the service. And it's a growing area for us. It's something that requires further implementation, but we'll see the drawdown from there. From what Stuart is doing now, every course is going through a people and an equality impact assessment in line with our EDI framework and the terms of reference there. So that will start to deliver through the courses. It isn't exactly where we need it to be, but that's part of the development that we're implementing. So on a next quarterly update, we'll be much further ahead.
Great, thank you. Another question about, it was great to hear from you, Stuart, about how you're making sure that the training you're providing is related to the risk in the local area. Just wanted to get some assurance as to the way that you'll be using the new risk profile to review and assess what training might be required in different areas, please, because I know HMI will be looking at that as well.
I can say that one again, Stuart. Yeah, ultimately, we're moving to a validation process, which will ensure that instead of it just being a minimum standard for a competency, our crews will be capability driven. So in an individual area, if there is a significant risk, the crews in that area will train to that individual capability, as well as having a minimum standard for maintenance of competence. And that way, where the risk profile changes in the county, through Stuart, we'll make sure that our training delivery moves with that societal risk as we need it to, while still maintaining a minimum competency against national standards. The RRM outcomes will help tailor Stuart's approach to how we deliver that capability overlaid by a competency.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And two just very quick final ones. COVID, during COVID, you stopped providing non-essential training, and I understand, Stuart, what you're saying there about delivering some of that via virtually. I just wanted to get an update on how you're coming back from having that pause on that non-essential training, and whether you're back up to where you should be now, or whether you're still trying to get there, please.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we paused everything for about 3 months. And then about when I took over my tenure at training, we started to put everything back in place. So we work with, it's a PFI building, so we work really closely with Sodexo, who managed that building, so that we had a safe system of work. So initially we had one-way systems, we had additional cleaning with masks. And then really, from about the beginning of this year, we've been back up to absolute full capacity. We've had lateral flow testing from January this year, which has allowed us to do that and has given us an extra safeguard. So we've worked closely with rep bodies to make sure that they were happy and supportive with that. So really, from certainly the beginning of this year, we've been pretty much back to normal. There's been a little bit of limiting on numbers due to sizes of rooms, but we've sort of managed to try and get around that. So we still managed to run 16 for the whole time course, and we just had to be clever in how we manage that and split that up across the rooms, different facilities that we've got available. So I'd say really from January, we've been pretty much full capacity, and we're fairly confident that we can maintain that, no problem.
That's great. Thank you. I'll leave my final question, actually. Thanks, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Right. OK, so does anybody else have any other questions? If not, we will. The last person or key person on the agenda now is North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service performance update from the newly appointed Chief Fire Officer. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just before I put my presentation up, it would be remiss of me not to mention the charity event that is tradition with the whole time recruit firefighter course. So this year, the recruits decided that they would climb Everest twice using 4 ladders at training centre, and they set out one hot Sunday morning in the end of June with the aspiration of climbing it twice and raising £1,500. And I'm really pleased to say that they achieved 3 times and raised £2,750. So well done to everybody. I visited the training centre myself. It was a hot day. Natalie was there along with all her trainee colleagues, really putting the effort in. It was really good to see, and thank you to all the members of the public that donated there towards that very worthwhile charity. Okay, I shall move straight on to the performance pack. Could you just shout up once I've got this up, just to make sure that people can see? And again, I won't be able to see.
Yeah, you're up, John.
Great. I shall put that into a slideshow. Okay, so this is a performance pack for the period of June 2021. So this slide here shows the overall number of incidents in June as 574. We had an increase in automatic fire alarms, a reduction in fires, and then also an increase in special service calls. So special service calls are where we may perform all manner of rescues or assisting with other services to gain entry and maybe making support to ambulance services with casualties, etc., in terms of removal from their homes. So that's there's no significant spikes anywhere on that this time, other than the marginal increases I've just mentioned. The number one culprit for our incidents remains false alarms from automatic fire alarms, and I'll come on to talking a little bit more about the work which we continue to monitor on that one. But otherwise, no major concerns on that incident slide this month, I'm pleased to say. So the automatic fire alarms and false alarms. False alarms break into 3 categories, and one of them is false alarm malicious. False alarm good intent is the other one, whereby people may think that there's some form of a fire. So, for example, they may see smoke issuing from a building or a car, and it turns out to be some other cause, perhaps cooking fumes or other, which then turns it into a false alarm. But the large proportion of false alarms we receive are automatic fire alarm systems. And this slide here shows the breakdown of that. So when you start looking at automatic fire alarm systems particularly, they form 2 parts. One is non-residential premises, for example, factories, and the other one is residential premises, private dwellings, and care homes, etc. And a larger proportion of our automatic fire alarms and false alarms tend to fall within the residential area. And that can, again, be down to faults on the system. It can be down to location of fire alarms and sometimes maintenance. And so that's where our teams are very much focused on working with the responsible people of those premises to try and ensure that all measures are taken so that we're preventing as much as we can the automatic fire alarms. It's something that we will look at within the risk and resource model to see how we might further increase our work in this area to improve the number of false alarms that we get because it's still too high. And this graph here just shows the sort of overall trend. I'm pleased to say that over the last 3 years, the trend is generally down, although we do get peaks and troughs, and some of those can be weather related. So, for example, when we get storms and water damage, that can cause for automatic fire alarm detectors to operate. And then also when you get hot weather, as we've now got, and start harvesting, insects can actually trigger an alarm to go off. So there's all manner of things that can cause these things to operate. Moving forward onto our absence levels, this shows here that our absence levels have sort of remained static throughout the COVID pandemic in terms of normal sickness. When I say normal sickness, that's just, you know, the accidents and general sickness that people get. It is slightly increased since the end of March, and it's something that we will continue to closely monitor. But I'm pleased to say that COVID-related sickness is generally low compared to what we've had over the last 12 months. But we're still getting spikes, unfortunately. But you know, the new government announcement on the exemptions from the self-isolation is something that we're now closely working with to understand how that might impact us going forward.
John, can I just?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Tom, go ahead. I can't see hands up, so please ask a question.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback, but I just wondered whether we'd looked back beyond that, because I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, the sickness levels dropped off quite significantly. And I just wonder whether actually what we're seeing here is a rise back to the pre-COVID. It's a bizarre situation, isn't it? But yeah, whether it's to do with working from home, where that was possible for different staff, or what, I don't know. But it'd be interesting to maybe have a look at what that was like pre-pandemic as well, to see if we're actually getting back to what the pre-pandemic levels were like.
Yeah, that's no problem at all, Tom. I've asked for some analysis to be undertaken from the last public accountability meeting, actually, and so our people services colleagues are monitoring this for me now more closely. So I should be able to provide more detail in the next sort of couple of public accountability meetings. One thing that they have noticed, it's musculoskeletal issues that are causing the problem currently. So that's people with backs, particularly, and, you know, muscle injuries, arms and legs, etc. So whether that's because people are now getting back into the workplace again or taking up sport activities that may not have been able to do, very early to say, but there's an early indication there. And then the other element is much to do with mental health as well. So it's something that we will continue to monitor going forward, and I hope we'll be able to provide more of a detail going in the months to come.
Can we pick the questions up? Any more questions, Tom, at the end? Because I'm just conscious in terms of time, and John's still got his stuff to go through.
Okay. So this slide here shows a breakdown between the staffing levels. One thing I'd need to point out here, it looks as though our on-call stations have a really bad sickness rate compared to the whole-time stations. And this is due to the nuances of the recording. So our whole-time stations work generally 4 days on and then 4 days off, and the sickness is reflected over those 4 days on duty. So effectively, it's recorded very differently, whereas our on-call, it covers a full 7-day period. So that's why we have an increase in those sickness levels on the whole time, on the on-call compared to the whole time. It's something you can't draw a direct comparison on. But nonetheless, the long-term sickness within both categories are areas that are being closely monitored now. And like I said, that tends to be very much related to back and limb injury at the moment. So moving on to the next slide, this is our overall fire cover levels, and this includes both whole-time and on-call. And I'm sad to say that this is dropping. Over the last 3 months, it's gone from 90% down to 86%. It's fairly reflective of the time of year, and I'll come on to the on-call in a minute. But you know, we've had a few influences around this. One is to do with COVID. So we've had some circumstances where we've lost entire crews due to COVID and the need to self-isolate. So hopefully the new government's guidance will support and help on that one. In general, our overall staffing levels enable us to keep within the optimum and maximum level, but we are seeing slight increases where we get to critical level, particularly at this period where we're into the summer holiday period, and it's something we're working very, very closely on going forward to monitor that. But I'd like to give assurance to the public that we will always be able to mobilise our pumps should the need arise for an emergency. We make sure that we've got a fair spread of cover throughout the county always. This is our on-call availability for June, and again there it shows that we were at 80% where we've been previously up at 85%, and interestingly you know, the year previously we were overall about 83%. So it has dropped. It's natural at this time of year, but this is where we've really got to do the work to improve the terms and conditions for our on-call, and also to look towards, as Stuart's mentioned earlier, about how we can improve and change our selection criteria and how we make it more flexible for the training to make it more appealing and more to want to come and join the on-call service with us. Moving on to prevention activity. I'm pleased to say now that the operational crews are getting out and about now and doing far more safe and well and other work in terms of the prevention activities. The darker blue is operational stations, and the light blue is community safety officers. So you'll see there that safe and wells, we're as a service, we're really increasing and improving that now, as we are with other elements of prevention activity. And to break that down further, to compare June to May, operational crews increased from 174 activities up to 294. So that's you know, a good increase, and I would like to think that that will now continue to improve and increase going forward as more of the COVID restrictions are released and we get back to some form of normality. Breaking it down even further there, this shows the general activities by category, and water safety is, unfortunately I don't have the comparison for May, but water safety is an area that I'm sure we'll all be aware of is very key at the moment. Sadly, we've had some nasty events in North Yorkshire and across the region, and it's something that crews are very, very focused on in terms of prevention activities. Make sure that, especially as we're heading into the summer holiday period, we're out and about encouraging people not to do anything safely if they are going to go into open water, but preferably not to go in there at all. Okay, and then moving forward into the protection activity, again, the darker blue is where we've now got operational crews back out undertaking audits of premises. So that's really now increasing, and when I break it down into the comparisons with the month, it is moving on now nicely. That businesses are now opening up, so that's now enabling us to be able to go out and undertake the audits on site again, rather than doing desk-based audits. Looking at the overall activities there by month, our regulatory activity, which is where we go into premises and audit, is the one that we're really increasing on. The statutory and non-statutory is only covered by the fire safety specialist officers and not by operational crews, and that's why there's no dark colour on there. But overall, our activity levels are improving and increasing as the lockdown restrictions have started to ease. and happy to take any questions should anyone have any.
Thank you, John. Thanks for a very good, clear overview. Colleagues, who's got a question for John? Tom's got his hand up again. He's keen.
Thanks, John. Just final question covering both the home fire safety, safe and well, and the protection aspects that you just covered there. Are we back up to pre-COVID levels yet? And if not, why not? And what's the plan to get it?
So in answer to the question, Tom, not yet. And that's not because of the willingness of crews not to go out and do it or anything of that nature. It's more about not all premises are fully functional yet, and not all premises are willing to accommodate crews in there. But then also our partners are not fully functioning back to normal as yet. I'm hoping that now we've got the final lockdown released recently, then we'll see hopefully more a move back to normality. But we're nowhere near where we were pre-COVID, but that's because of other factors that are beyond our control. And I think there's a real push and a drive now to get back to normal, but that relies on other agencies supporting us as well. So healthcare practitioners, we would normally get referrals in, but they're not actually going into people's homes in the same spirit that they were pre-COVID. So there will be some adjustment required going forward, but it is our intention. We are doing as much as we can, and will continue to do to really drive those numbers up as much as we can, so that we're helping the vulnerable within our society.
Great. And do we know what the national picture is like on that? Are other services struggling as well, or are we slightly behind there?
No, we are very similar to colleagues. When I speak to national colleagues, this is a national picture now overall, and it's going to be some time before we get back to pre-COVID measures, if at all, due to the changes in society and lifestyles and other things that are associated with this. For example, into care homes where we'd normally have been, there's still that very, very much, a nervousness, shall we say, in some environments to be able to go out there fully. But we'll continue to push for this, because it's really important that we fulfil all our duties.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we don't have any other business. So all I have to do is remind everybody that the date of the next meeting is Tuesday, the 31st of August, 2021. And I would like to thank everybody for participating in the meeting, and for the reports today, and for the information, which has been very, very helpful. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.